The largest nuclear power suffers a defeat in the conflict, which is self-unleashed, announced mobilization that is unlikely to change the situation, and it seems that only one card remains in the hand, the nuclear card. It certainly poses some big challenges to the White House, to NATO, European countries, because the rational calculation is that Putin will not use nuclear weapons, because it will provide very little in the way of military benefits. It will almost certainly harden opposition around the world to Russia. He certainly wouldn't presumably use nuclear weapons against the NATO country because of the high likelihood of escalation to a full-scale nuclear war. So that would lead people to discount the threat. But again, if you go back to the February, the United States government was arguing that Putin was likely to invade Ukraine. Everybody was dismissing the conclusion on the grounds that it just didn't make sense to invade Ukraine, with 150,000 or so troops. And so this was all either posturing or just leading up to a smaller military operation, and then Putin did what everybody had not predicted, except the US government and the British government, has said he wouldn't do so. So it's troubling. But a full-scale nuclear war between NATO and Russia is not beneficial to both sides. States strive to establish their security, not self-destruction. Russia's preparation for a nuclear conflict will occur on a scale that will be visible to West, and this will make Russian government the number one target. In such a situation, Putin's guards could probably get rich overnight, and the world would lose one dictator, but still only a fantasy. But still, Putin tangentially announced a number of things, including partial mobilization of his troops, that was later explained by Russian defense minister as around 300,000. Plus, Putin repeated clear indications that Russia was ready to use weapons of mass destruction. According to Russian military doctrine, the Russian Federation reserves the right to use nuclear weapons in response to the use of nuclear and other types of weapons of mass destruction against it or its allies, as well as in the event of aggression against the Russian Federation with the use of conventional weapons, when the very existence of the state is endangered. As widely noted, Russia's got to put together what by all appearances is sham elections, in which you can see upwards of 95% of the vote of the people choosing to be a part of Russia. Then they declared parts of these four regions, and these were Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia and Kherson regions, all of which are not totally controlled by Russia. They control chunks of them. Russia then says that they're Russian territory. Ukraine attacks these, they're attacking Russian territory. This raises to a new level of escalation, and all bets are on what we can then deploy. What it also means, however, is that Russia can then start to treat the citizens of these regions as Russian citizens, and potentially fold them into its mobilization effort. The main argument to vote for Russia evidently remains the muzzle of an automatic rifle aimed at you. It's kind of democracy thing, you know? I mean, just imagine what kind of videos the Kremlin would have posed themselves as if the rigged election had failed.
We lost several divisions near Kharkov. Mobilization is difficult, but it passes. By the end of autumn, there will be about 1 million of people at the front. And if Ukrainians suddenly turn up, I think we will hit them with nuclear weapons.
Referendum results, sir.
2% in Kherson, 3% in Zaporizhia. Идиоты! Вы должны были нарисовать результаты референдума, а не посчитать голоса!
Real results? Who the hell needs them? In the Kremlin's plans, the regions were annexed yesterday, so this is a new Russian territory. No one recognizes these referenda as legitimate, and at the same time, Russia's right to defend these territories with the nuclear weapons. Then why? Because the ongoing narrative coming from the Kremlin has been to create their own reality, that these are Ukrainian fascists that brought this all about backed by West, that wants to see the disintegration of Russia, that wants to dance on the grave of Russia just like it did on the Soviet Union, and that it's time for Russians to stand up and defend their country and defend their patrimony, their lineage, and so forth. That has appealed to a certain strain of Russians. But as we saw again with this latest round of protests and voting with their feet, Russians are very uneasy about this, and there's a lot of Russians who do not want to be charged into the Ukrainian theater and fighting Ukrainians. in perpetrating acts like we have now seen emerge from places like Izium, which was reclaimed by Ukrainians, and where a lot of evidence revealed the war crimes are committed. The bluff is important here. Russia knows that these pseudo-elections are not an argument for other states, but it is trying to convince everyone that this is a reasonable ground for itself, and it is ready to defend these territories no matter what the cost. Nevertheless, a competent policy is always a cold calculation. They're not confused with the human relations. Here works the bluff, deceit, and provocation formula. Tactical nuclear weapons won't be a fatal blow completely destroying Ukrainian armed forces, yet would be an arrogant declaration of bifurcation of the international security system, especially entangling the American doctrine of non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. No one on the planet would ever answer you with certainty whether Putin will use nukes or not. Evaluating the probability, let's stick to these statements. Positive ones that raise the chance. First, usage in order to save internal reputation within the regime. Second one, possible usage due to non-conformity of Putin's calculation, which was clearly seen with the initiation of Russian invasion. And the third one, the military application under the agenda of Russian nuclear doctrine. Then let's stick to negative ones that lower the chance. First, negative reaction of Russia's partners. Second one, very little in the way of cost to benefit in terms of military gains. And the third one, high likelihood of escalation to a full-scale war with NATO. As well as a factor of uncertainty, because it's impossible to understand to which extent Putin's power is absolute and whether nuclear decision is taken collectively in Russia. Of course, you decide what the odds of the usage of nuclear weapons, and it will be greatly appreciated if you share your evaluation in the comments below. If talking our opinion, the space remains tense, but the probability of appliance is truly limited.